Evangelism, God's way. It took me a while to be able to understand this concept, but once I did, then it was very easy to stay away from programs that would take more money in order to work than it was to understand what God was doing. So this is an important teaching. But evangelism, when we do it God's way, and this comes from looking at the three senses from the Old Testament. Okay, and it says in Genesis 46, when Jacob went into Goshen, when Jacob went into Egypt, uh, Joseph was already there waiting for him. It says that a total of 66 people went in all, not including the wives of the sons, but including all the sons, all the kids. Okay, and so when we look at Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, and all the rest, we can see that the total is going to be 66. In Genesis 46:26, you'll see that number. Then there's another number that is also there, and it talks about that the total number that was going to be there was going to be 70 that went in, including Joseph, including his two sons, and including Jacob. So we went from 66 to 70 by adding Joseph and his two sons that were already there, and then we include Jacob, we come up with 70. And then, so by adding Jacob, that's not included in here, then we come up to 70. And then Stephen, when he's talking in the book of Acts, and he makes a statement saying that all that came into Egypt with Joseph at the time were a total of 75. That seems to contradict the other two numbers. So where do we get the 5 from? If we were to add the women, Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, and Rachel, and then Dinah, the seventh daughter of Leah, that were not included in the original. When we add them in, Stephen includes them in his sermon right before he's stoned. So when we're able to look at the numbers in the Old Testament in the census, there's a progression, there's a history that if you take a look at them, God will give you some insight into those. So we went from 66, and when we add Joseph, his two sons that were already in Egypt, and then Jacob, we come up to 70. Then when we add the four wives and the sister Dinah that was not included in the original, we come up to 75. I've seen some debates on this, but if you just look at the numbers, I mean, there's no mystery into it. You just have to kind of know what you have to go and look at the originals and who was included and who was excluded in order to be able to come up with it. So it's a simple process, but you still have to do your homework. Case we do this in order to get to the first census. The first census happens in the second year when they're going into the wilderness. The tabernacle has just been set up. Tabernacle was set up on the first day of the first month of the second year, and then this census is happening already in the second month. So, and it says these are the ones that were numbered of the children of Israel from their father's house by the men, and all who were numbered according to their army or of the forces. So this numbering that we're going to see here has to do with the men. Why were the women not included? Because they're measuring the strength. They're measuring the strength of the armies. If you look at this and you come to the conclusion, or you draw a conclusion that the women, for whatever reason, because they were lesser citizens, whatever, are not included or not added into this, then you're going to draw a wrong conclusion, because men that died in battle were dispensable. The women were always protected. So the value is there. So they're counting the number of men. If they had to go into battle, what would the number be? And this is all the sons that were added over 20. Now it says by their forces, but when you look at the second census, you understand something a little different. So total was 603, 550,000, but the Levites were not included in here. Okay? And when we look at them, the Levites are not included in this number of 603,550. So this is the first census that Moses and Aaron, that is now the high priest at the time, do, counting all the men that are under 20, that are over 20 years old, that would be fit for battle. That's what that number is. So now, if we were to add, if most of these men would be married, by the way, if you're in your 20s. So if we were to add, let's say 75%, 8% that were married, we would come up to almost a million. Half of them. If we double this number, if they were all married, it would be 1,200,000. So let's say a million, and then if they all had two kids, then we come up to 2 million, 3 million, very, very easily. I took a look at the census of Egypt at that time, if it's possible, and it says that Egypt, the census around Egypt would have been somewhere around 5 or 6 million. And it says that the Pharaoh looked at the numbering of the people of Israel, and they saw that they were great in number, almost equal to theirs. So this number could be from 2 million to 4 or 5 million, possibly. But for now, we're just dealing with the 603,000 of the men. But the total number that came out of Egypt would have been 2 or 3 million, somewhere in there. Okay, so if we look at this, if we look at the second census, in Numbers 26, you're going to have the second census. This is right before they're going into Jericho. These were the numbers, the ones that were numbered by Moses, and not Aaron, but Aaron's son Eleazar, that is now the priest. This is by the Jordan, across from Jericho. But among these was not a man from the original, here, from the original 603,000, not one of those was included in here. Okay, and this number was 601,730, but it says except for Caleb, the son of Jehuneh, the Kenizzite, and Joseph ben Nun, Joseph the son of Nun. Okay, so in this number, none of these were there. So they've all been replaced, except for, it says Caleb and Joseph. But Caleb, there's a little bit of insight I want to share with you. I didn't know this, but Caleb is from the tribe of Kenizzite. He's not an Israelite. When Abraham is called out by God, and there are some tribes that are mentioned, the Kenizzites would have been one of those tribes that was mentioned. So somewhere along the line, either as a slave or when they went into Egypt, Caleb's family was probably brought in there, and Caleb added himself to the Israelites. So we have Joshua, that is from the tribe of Ephraim, and Caleb, it says he's from the tribe of Judah, but he's a Kenizzite, which means he added himself into that. He became an Israelite, and he added himself to the tribe, not born into the tribe of Judah. Okay, so that's just kind of important. So the two people, according to the Bible, that of the original that went in, one was a sojourner, one was one that added himself in, an alien to the Israelite, and the other one was an Israelite. But was there more from the original ones that aren't here? Okay, that's a good question, because if we go back, he says that Moses and Eleazar is now the high priest. When Moses and Aaron numbered the people in the original 603,000, Eleazar was there. Eleazar and Ithamar were there, and then the two, Nadab and Abihu, the four sons of of Aaron, were at Mount Sinai. So you have to be very careful when it says except. What he's saying is, from these that were numbered, remember the Israelites, the Levites were not numbered. So there were some Levites, not included in the number, but there were some Levites that made it through the wilderness. I just want you to understand that uh, uh, when we preach absolutes, I can always tell if somebody has read the story or if they just heard it regurgitated from somebody else, that they heard somebody taught them the story. I can tell the difference between one that is read and one that has heard the story just by asking a certain amount of questions. One of the questions that I love to ask is, how many or who are the ones that came out of the wilderness from the original? They always tell me Joshua and Caleb, but no one has I run into one person that has told me that Eliezer was also included in there. So it's just kind of interesting. See, now you know because I gave you the shortcut. Okay, from these were those that were numbered, and it was a total of 601,000 in the second census that happened. Now, if we were to look at the difference between the first census and the second census is almost 2,000, 1,800. And I did accounting for some 20 years. I love to look at the numbers and kind of see what they tell me. So one of the things that I see is there is a shift from Leah's kids, 24,000 is reduced, and it seems like Rachel's kids, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Benjamin seem to pick up the slack, except for Ephraim. So there's a shift because the number isn't the difference isn't that much between the two. So that's one of the first things that I see. The second thing that I see is all the numbers in red would have been the numbers that went down. And so I'm looking at it and I'm looking at it. I'm trying to figure out, what happened or what was it. And I don't have a definite answer, but I have some ideas. And I know eventually when I feel that God is asking me a question, because he never tells me, so I've got to go look it up, and eventually one day it's just when I read a verse somewhere down in the Bible somewhere, then it's going to clarify for me. But the question stays; it stays in my mind. But I took a look at this and took a shot at it. Then I remembered something. In the setting around the tabernacle, this is the east, the south, the west, and then the north. This would have been Judah. When I looked at these red numbers, I was trying to figure out where are they in here, and then I was able to see them. And you notice one of the things that you notice is the south side, all of them reduced. So I'm looking at it, and so I see a pattern already, and I'm trying to figure out, what is it that happened, and then I see a couple of other things. If when they were to travel, Judah would go first. So these would go first, and then these would follow, and then this one would follow right after them. So in other words, Ephraim is right after Gad, and so they would be together if they were traveling. And then I remembered that when they were traveling and they started complaining because there was no water, and again they tell Moses, "You brought us out to the desert in order to die." I'm just wondering if when the snakes came out, they came out to the middle, to the ones that would have been complaining. Just a theory, I'm just I don't know, because I went and looked when Korah and Korah would have rebelled at the very beginning, but when they rebelled, 15,000 died. 14,950, 14,700 plus 250 of the leaders. Okay, so but that 15,000, those were possibly some of the Levites, because it was from the tribe of Korah, that was from the Levite tribe. They're not numbered in here. Okay, so the rest of those would have been from the tribe of Reuben. Reuben is one of the ones that lost, but Reuben is only reduced by 3,000. So I don't think it happened during the time of Korah. And during the other plagues, there isn't a number that is given. But when the snakes come out, would have been right before this census. So I think that's kind of when some of this happened. Okay, the second thing is the last one, Naphtali. Okay, so again, Judah goes first, and then the south side, Reuben, and then Ephraim, and then Dan, with Naphtali being at the very end. Okay, so at the very end, and then I remember a story where it says that they were They were traveling. They were traveling by their standards, and then the people start complaining. It says that the mixed multitude, or the ones in the very back, the ones that were not a part of any of the tribes, that were just lagging behind, they didn't add themselves like Caleb did to the tribe. It's called the mixed multitude. In some cases it's called the rabble. In other words, the rest of them, the ones in the very back, started complaining about not having meat and bread. They're tired of this manna, is what they say. So then the Lord's anger is aroused, and then fire from heaven comes and consumes those in the rear. So, well, Naphtali, it says that the mixed multitude murmured, and then Israel also. Naphtali, that would have been in the back, that would have been hearing all of this, the closest to them, they would have been the one that would have been affected. Again, just another thought, another theory. I can't prove it, but it kind of makes sense to me. So that's where I think Naphtali would have been affected. So this is what I saw when I'm looking at the census. Again, I don't know. I can't tell how many died. What I do know is when God preserved. In other words, it's 2,000. The difference from the first census to the second census is 2,000. But it's even bigger than that. Okay, if we were to add the years, if we add the years when they went into Egypt, the first census, and then 40 years later when they did the second census, if we look at the years, again, I remember 2 years ago when I was looking at this, the number, it just popped out at me. So this is what I saw. From the time that they went into Egypt, when Jacob goes into Egypt, to the first census that Moses takes 430 years. So it took him 430 years to get from 75, 66, 70, or 75 to 603,000, or 2 or 3 million people. Okay, it took him 430 years. That's when we do it. This is when man does it. It will take a generation of work, generation from generation to generation. If we do it, if it's up to us. Okay, when God replaces the 2 or 3 million, he does it in 40 years. That's evangelism 101. When I saw this, everything that I read in the Bible from that moment on, I looked at it like, what are you doing? How are you doing this? Why are you doing this? I stopped thinking, oh, the Lord, when a prophet says that the Lord called me from my youth. No, then I realized God is doing something. He needs people. So I started looking at what it is that he was doing. And then I started finding some of the keys in the way that growth happens, or when he puts them into a place. When they go into when Nebuchadnezzar comes in and he takes them into captivity, he tells them. Jeremiah writes to the captives, and he says, make sure, don't diminish. He says, make sure and keep growing. Give your daughters into marriage. Let your sons marry. Buy property. Buy herds. You're going to be there for 70 years, but do not diminish. Don't go down in numbers. Don't get sad and think that all hope is gone. He says, for I know the plans that I have for you, plans to not harm you, but to prosper you. So even in captivity, he's telling them, you're going to be prosperous. You're going to grow. You need to grow, is what he's saying. I'm looking at that. And from then on, I understood. God is in control of this thing. It's my job to tap into what it is that He's doing. If I think it's done by me, it will take me a generation. It will take. I may lose some of my kids. I may lose some of the family. I'm going to struggle if I'm going to work for the Lord. But when He does it, it's a little different. Okay, so if we keep looking at this, and Moses finally writes in Deuteronomy 29. He says, "And I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out on you, and your sandals have not worn out on your feet." So they need to go to J.C. Penney to buy any clothes, and it says you've still got the same shoes that when you came out. That's when God does it. And then remember, he fed on bread. So he says, you have not eaten bread from the ground. You have not eaten wine. In other words, from the ground you didn't have to harvest. So the curse that was given unto Eve and Adam, that by their sweat of the brow that they would glean from the ground, is gone. He's taken that. He says, I took care of you. I fed you. You didn't have to work the land. But you still had bread and you still had the wine that comes from the ground. So this is when God does the work. Okay, and he says, and he tells Joshua, when Joshua is going into the land, he says, from every step that you take, every step that every place that the sole of your foot hits on the ground, he says, I've made that promise to you. Same thing that he told Abraham. So he repeated this he said this to Abraham, repeated this to Jacob, and then he also is telling this to Joshua. And as I said to Moses too. So 4 people he repeated the thing. Only be strong and courageous. So be strong and courageous. Why? Because you're going to fight. Because you have to be valiant. No, 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 no. He says be strong and courageous. He said that you may observe and to do according to the instructions, according to everything that you wrote down that I gave to Moses. Which Moses, my servant, commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left. Be strong and courageous. Don't go left and don't go right, but stay on track with the instructions that I gave you. That's the strong and courageous. Not that you're going to be a man of war. Okay? He says, because I will drive him. I will drive him from the land for you. He says, but I'm not going to do it all at once. I'm going to as you increase in numbers, I will get the hornets, I will get the bees, and I will drive the people out. But you have to increase. If I do it all at one time, he says the beast of the field will take over the fields. So I'm going to keep them in there to keep the land going until you increase in number and you're able to drive them out yourself. So God's in control. God is doing this. The growth has to come from God. He's the one that sees everything going. Okay, and then at the very end he says, this book or these writings or these scrolls of the Torah, of the instructions, shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, for then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. By meditating on the instructions, you will have good success. Okay, and David says this a little different. He says, create in me a clean heart. It's talking about, don't cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me in your generous, upright spirit. This word generous doesn't mean generosity. What it actually means is make me sit upright. Your spirit will make me upright, will make me stand up. Let your spirit stand me up. In other words, he's my brace. So uphold me by your spirit that braces me, is what he's saying. I don't know why they this is King James. I don't know why they changed it to generous. It says, then I will teach Lamad, I will teach the transgressors your way. The transgressors can only be those that know the law. So then I will teach Israel, or the believers, your way, and the sinners shall be converted unto you. When I know, I can teach. So I want to look at this. I want to look at this word lamad, or to teach. It's lamad. It's mem and then dalet. Lamad, mem, and dalet. The whole word is lamad, but when you spell it out, it's LMD. Okay, so lamad, or it's the staff of correction, the staff of instruction, is the letter that stands taller than all of the other Hebrew letters. So as soon as you can see it right off the bat when you look at any word. So it means instructions. Mem, it implies or has a meaning of the womb, or when I teach from the womb to the door. Dalet is the door, when they go out the door. So when I teach a young man, when I teach a child from the womb, from the time that they're born, all the way to when they walk out on the door into the world by themselves, Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So, in order to teach from the mem and to the door, you have to know the instructions. Otherwise, you're going to teach him something else. And he says, my words you will meditate on them day and night, so that I can teach those that fail, or the believers that fail, the transgressors, your ways. And I will teach the sinner, and the sinners will be converted unto you. So, evangelism, God's way. Okay, so let's say that will, great, Brother Lopez. That's from the Old Testament, but we're in the New Testament now. Let's tell me something about there. Okay, so let's take a look at the New Testament. It's called the Acts of the Apostles, the fifth book in the New Testament. The problem is this: is that the apostles collectively are only in chapter 1. After that, it's only three, four apostles that are spoken of. It's Peter, James, John is mentioned there a couple of times, and then the rest is going to be Paul, Silas, Barnabas. So it's not really the Acts of the Apostles collectively, or of the 12. It's actually the work of the Spirit is what it is with it, as the church comes up. But anyway, that out of the way. In Pentecost, it says that 3,000 from every nation, from different tongues, meaning from the different languages, from the different nations, came in. Who invited them? It was in the instructions that 3 times a year you will come before me. When they come to Pentecost, the Jews from the other nations follow the instructions. So in other words, God is the one that has brought them here, and it has to be 50 days from the time from Passover. So if everything was, if Christ concluded everything at the cross, why does Pentecost have to be fulfilled? So the instructions are still working. Okay, so at Pentecost 3,000 came in, and then how can you get 3,000? If you look at this is Herod's temple, you can see all these tents where people are selling different things. You can get 20,000 people in here, because the next time in Acts 3, when Peter and John are going to the temple, it says to pray at the ninth hour. It says that when they spoke there's a man that is healed by the gate beautiful, and when they spoke, 5,000 were added to them. Who invited the 5,000? Again, they are there because the instructions told them to come in. Okay, and God, in other words, God laid it out. So 5,000, and then it says so a total of 8,000 within maybe the first 2 chapters of the books of Acts. And then you have Saul of Tarsus. Who evangelized him? It says that he heard a voice from heaven, that he was blinded, fell down, heard a voice from heaven saying, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he says, who are you, Lord? Okay, so all of these, there was no evangelism. God had a plan that he needed to work with. And this one here is where, from chapter 11 on, is where this whole story of the book of Acts is from one person. Okay, and then Acts 10, Cornelius. Peter is tied up doing his worship, and when he gets a dream, because there is a man, that Cornelius, a Gentile, not a Jew. And you already know the story, so I don't need to go to the story. Again, who evangelized him? It says that because Cornelius, he says, Cornelius, your offerings and your sacrifices I have seen and I have observed. Why is Cornelius doing offering and sacrifices, and why would those be acceptable to the Lord if the cross has already done away with all of this? But he was looking at the heart of Cornelius, and this is where again the Gentiles comes in. Who did the evangelizing? Okay, so and then at the very end, when Jesus predicts, when he tells the disciples, he says, and this building will be destroyed. No stone will be left unturned. So from here, the church gets dispersed through all of the nations. Again, this is God's plan. So if you want to grow your church, if you want to do evangelistic work, it's probably a good idea to find out what the instructions say so that you can tap into what he's doing, and then you'll see a doubling, a tripling in three or four, or 5 years, rather than having to work. I remember I was with a pastor that had been there for 10 years, with 30 people, 40 people. Something's wrong. We shouldn't be working for him. It's his work. He'll do the work. It's our job to fall into his plan. Now, some of us, Paul, again, wound up in prison. I don't know how many years, but so that he would be able to write everything that we're reading you. So some purposes are different, but I've seen some pastors that have a small church and it takes them a generation. A generation is 30 or 40 years, and then all of a sudden they pass away, and the son or somebody else takes, and the church explodes. I've seen the opposite. I've seen where a church has exploded, and then somebody takes it over, and then because they want to implement their ideas or their concept, the church diminishes. So, to me, it's if you find the instructions, if you read the instructions, if you know what he's doing, you'll be able to tap into that. It's evangelism, God's way. So we either work for God, or he's going to work for us. This is his work, and this is his plan. I've seen this 2 or 3 times. It's so much better if we just to tap into what it is that he's doing.